Okay, so it's hour 2. We're going to resume with our Laravel application. So we're going to take, we now are going to take this code out of our post handler because we don't just want to take the user to the home page. We want to use our album model and actually save the new album. So because this is a post, we're going to need to add a couple things here. The first one at the top, in order to process any kind of post request, we need to make a reference to one of Laravel's built-in libraries. So up here, after we've referenced our model, we're going to use a library called Illuminate plus HTTP request. If we don't use this library, this will basically allow us, kind of does the equivalent of giving us access to the post array. Without this reference, we're not going to be able to read any values that were posted. So we'll make this reference. I can put a comment on reference request library process form submissions. So on the functions we've written so far to load the home page, load the albums page, load the album form, there's no information coming in. We just take that URL and load the page. We don't have to deal with any kind of data request. But when a form's submitted, well, we have data coming along with it. So inside our post here, to handle that, specify that we have some kind of input parameters. So this $ request, this is kind of the equivalent of $ post. That's all of the information submitted in the form. So we're going to create a new instance of our album model. So for those of you who are in programmer, this is similar to like a constructor. We're creating an instance of an object like you would in Java. We're creating a new instance of an album here. And now we want to fill all the properties, right? Because we've said, well, Laravel actually knows what an album looks like. We haven't had to define it. If this was a Java class, we'd have to define all the properties. Assumes the properties based on what's in our database. We're going to take our form request values and populate our new album. So our album title is equal to our request title. A little bit simpler syntax as opposed to, the old way where we do this, where we need brackets and quotes and underscores. We don't need that. So this is kind of the equivalent of this in our traditional PHP. So then we'll fill out the year. So now we've populated our model. So now we just need to call a method of our Laravel model that will do an insert. So it'll be in this list. Lots of methods available. What method should we call to add it to the database? Yeah, let's just call album save. So just like when we ran our query, we don't have to connect to the database. We don't have to write any SQL code. We don't have to bind parameters or do any of that. Create an album, fill the properties, call save. And then, as I think Sarbrinder mentioned earlier, we want to redirect to the albums page. This one's easy. Return. Instead of using that crazy header location syntax, we have a function that makes sense called redirect. And we just redirect album. By the way, you see the word to here? Don't type this word. This is just a code hint from the new version of PHP Storm. So this word to here in gray, that's not part of the code. That's just my code hinting turned on in PHP Storm. So I don't want you to type to colon. Yes, you know what? I realized someone else was having that problem too, because in my code hint here it says view colon. So it's kind of hard to see that it's grayed out. That's just a code hint. That's not actual PHP code. So again, all of the logic is separate from our data and from our presentation. We move the logic in the controller so it's separated out from our view. And we have to write a lot less code to go ahead and do an insert. We should be able to try out our form now. We should be able to put in a new album and see if it gets saved and if we get redirected to our albums.php. I'm going to try it. So I'll go ahead and add a new album. And we'll see whether our MVC structure can do the saving. There we go. There's our new album. So our code is all broken up, right? We have our logic in our root file. We have our user interface in our view. And we haven't had to do anything. We just created that empty model called album, and Laravel's smart enough to use that for doing a save. I could go and put in more stuff. And I can delete some of them. So there was our code for doing a post. So using this structure just to show you kind of how similar this is to how the structure will work in, say, in a different language, I'll show you what I've been doing with the second year students, both in programmer and web. I'll show you a sample. We can find one here on Git. So in, for example, my Wednesday morning class of programmers where we're using MVC, but we're using Node.js. We go and look at, let's see, what's it, 9? So we built a bookstore. We could add, edit, view, delete books. So here was our books file. Now this is all JavaScript. I won't explain all of it, but notice, so here is our post handler. When we get a post request at books/add, we check if the user's logged in because we made it a private page. We created a new book. So we used the request, just like we just did with Laravel, and we filled all the properties like title, author, and year. And we call book.create. So instead of save, the method name is create, but it does the same thing. So this is our JavaScript, server-side JavaScript, Node.js version of similar code. If we look at a ASP.NET, a C# example, it's going to look similar. So the nice thing is once we kind of understand and get used to the pattern, it's very easy to move from one MVC framework to another. We just have to learn the language. Let's see. You could probably see what one of these looks like. So here's a controller in C#. So we had a store. So very similar, when we're selecting a list of data, we just use our connection. There's our query. Very simple query, and we return a view and we pass it the data. So we're kind of using this same pattern over and over again. It's going to be similar when we use ASP.NET MVC, similar when we use Node.js. We use our model to fetch the data, and we hand that data to the view, or we run a post request, same kind of thing. So now we can do create, we can do create, we can read. I don't think we'll have time to do edit today, but I'd like to just add the delete function, and then we'll stop with Laravel, and I'll give you your lab to do. Anybody have any questions about our post command? Well, let's go and add a delete button to our albums page. So we'll leave edit out. I'll just open up my albums page. We'll add one more column. We'll just make the heading say delete. We won't have it say actions. But first, we'll just put on a delete button. I'll kind of leave the href blank for a minute. So we'll use btn danger, and that will get red delete buttons like we've. At the moment, they don't go anywhere. So now we want to set up a path for them. So we'll set them to albums/delete. And this part is where Laravel is way easier. You may remember how complicated it was to write our delete links and pass the ID on to them. Way easier with Laravel. We just do this. Album. Album ID, that's all. So this should go to /album/delete/ and we just append the ID on the end. We'll see how that does. So we get not found, which is okay, but that's the URL we want. Album, different ID. So this structure was a lot easier than building those links the way we did it before, where we had to close our quotes and then write in $, album, bracket, quote, album ID, quote, bracket, and then append. So our syntax is much easier. Now we still get a 404 error. Why do we get a 404 error when we clicked out those links?
We don't have that link.
Yeah, so well, we're not actually going to build a view, right? We don't need to show the user anything for delete. So it's not so much a page, it's not that we don't have a page. What do we need in order to get the error to go away? Yeah, in our root file, in our controller, we need what type of request is being made when we click this link. What type of HTTP request is it? Yeah, get's the default. So we need to write a get root for /album/delete, and then we also will need to parse the ID from the end of it. So go back to our roots. We'll write one more get, albums/delete. And now, remember, our delete's always going to have an ID. So we need to represent that there's an ID coming in as part of that URL. So all we need is this. By putting that in curly brackets, that represents that it's a parameter. So also a friendlier URL structure than we did before, where we had !, album ID equals. We don't need the question mark. We don't need the word album ID in our URL. Our incoming value is the ID. Don't have the ID, we don't know which album to delete. So again, we're going to use our album model. Just like it has a built-in save method, a built-in get method. First, we're going to look up, we're going to identify the right album. And then we just call delete. That uses our model, looks up just this one album based on the ID coming in from MySQL. And then we just, again, reload the page, redirect. So our code is much smaller and simpler, again, because of Laravel structure. No connection, no SQL command. Let's try and see what happens. Gone. So we haven't added our confirmation to it. I think I'll skip that for today, but there's our code to remove. And it will be the same thing when we use Node.js, same when we call C#. We reference our model and we call remove. I think in Node.js, the method is called remove instead of delete. In C#, the method we would use is called remove. So all of our logic and our CRUD lives here in our controller. And we really only needed to build two simple views. So those hidden pages we had created before for saving and deleting, we don't need those anymore. with Laravel, with MVC, if we just want to run some processing on the server and then take the user somewhere else, we don't even need to create a view. We can just run a get or post request, do whatever operation we want to do in our database, and then take the user wherever they're supposed to go. So same if like we built a validate.php page, right? It checks the login, and it either takes the user back to the login page or takes them to our main page. With this structure, we don't need that. We would just have a login post, and we would decide to redirect them to either back to the login view or to whatever our private home page is. We don't have to create a physical file like a view when there's nothing to show to the user. We could just run our logic in the background. Any questions for anybody? This one? Sure. You know what? Well, that kind of leads into a question I get often. Well, but people say, especially when we start using things like ASP.NET MVC, like Laravel built out so much of this structure for us, right? So the benefits are not only does it give us structure, but we can also build an application much faster because we don't have to write everything from scratch when we use these kind of, it's called a scaffold, right? It pre-builds stuff that we just add on to. So one of the things students say is, well, it's great you showed us this, but this is so much easier than writing all the code ourselves. Why have we been writing all the code ourselves for 3.5 months? Why didn't you just show us these tools? If these tools save us time and make it easier, why have we done all of this manual work in coding all these things that are built into a framework like Laravel? And Laravel's not the only one, there's other ones. So why would I have made you do all this manual work when Laravel does a lot of this stuff for you? Sorry?
You might be picking on us.
Great, could be. I'm just a mean guy, yeah, could be. That's the big thing. If I showed you this from day one where I said, run this command and suddenly you have a website built, you'd say, cool, I built a website with one command at the command line, but you'd have really no understanding of what it actually built for you. I mean, there's still lots of stuff in Laravel even I don't understand. Right? So by having you do it all yourself from scratch, you now starting to understand what tools like this will do. So we need to do it from scratch for a while to get that basis of what is a web application? How does data move back and forth between a user's browser and our database? So I found that doing all that stuff manually is the best way to learn and understand what's going on. Right? Once we've got that understanding, which most of us are at, then we can use tools like this to save us time and do things more efficiently. So moving forward, we're going to use other MVC frameworks in other courses, but it's kind of like rather than just handing you the keys to the car, I wanted to teach you how to drive first. Now I'm giving you the keys to the car. Now you can go and drive on your own. Okay. But I wanted to take driving lessons with me sitting in the passenger seat for a while, rather than me just saying, here's the car, go ahead and drive. So we will work with these kinds of frameworks. The good news is by doing this, I know this is kind of new and maybe sort of confusing, but you're going to be able to learn that much faster in our next few web courses because we're going to say, oh, we kind of did that. I recognize that. This is similar, it's like this in C#, but that's kind of similar to what we did with Laravel. And then we move to Node and Express, and then you're going to say, okay, those things are similar to what we've already done with PHP and C#. But if you want to learn something like Ruby on Rails, well, it's another MVC framework. All you have to do is learn the syntax for Ruby, and you can build web applications with that we're already using. Okay. I will push our code up to GitHub.